Hello, thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Paulo. I'm chair of a Business Science and Business Working Group. It's my great pleasure to introduce Brandon Rowan from Merlin. He will talk on the topic, the innovation journey from research results to product. Let me just remind you that you can ask any questions on the chat and the YouTube page. And let me also say that the next webinar before we start is on the 21st of December. It will be given by Patricia Marti-Pug, and she'll talk about her transition from academia to industry, and the topic will be Oshinogami, and an ongoing experiment from academia to business. It will be for free, so you're also quite welcome to join us there. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Brandon. Brandon, yeah, we can start.
Hi, everyone. Hi, thanks very much for the introduction. As Pablo said, my name is Brendan. I'm from a company called BlueSpecs based in Madrid, but we operate across the whole of Europe. And I'm here in part of the project called Merlin. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully we can kick off then. So Pablo, can you let me know if you can see that okay? Okay, so I'll continue. So just to start off, Merlin is an EU-funded project. We have the aim to support researchers like yourselves from the Marie Curie network who have results from their research but not quite sure exactly whether or not they have value attached to them and whether or not they should commercialize them. So the project itself is called Merlin. It stands for Methodologies for Researcher-Led Innovation. We have a series of workshops based around different methodologies to apply. The cities that the workshops happen in is Cambridge, Madrid, Poznan, Vilnius, Berlin, Warsaw, Bucharest, and Tallinn. The last one that we had was on entrepreneurial mindset just November, this month gone. The next one coming up is Interpreting the Customer based in Cambridge. So please check out merlin-ict.eu if you are interested in joining any of the workshops. The second thing to add then is we join in conferences. So if you go to any of the European conferences, you might find us there. And the last thing to add is that we have a series of webinars and a series of meetups ourselves. So again, if you're interested in exploring your research, do check out the website, sign up to our mailing list, and then get involved that way. So just where to begin today. So the workshop we're talking about today, the webinar we're talking about today is the innovation journey. What I hope to give here is a quick overview of some of the key steps and concepts across the way. And
excuse me, Brandon,
yes.
Just to interrupt, the presentation is not showing yet. It's stuck on my face. Could you try to restart your presentation?
Sure, I'll do that now.
I'll hide myself to make it easier, and then from the broadcast.
Can you see it now?
Not yet. Let me hide myself. Maybe it will make it faster, and then if not, I'll come back on. But you can try to continue.
Okay. So still no joy. Okay. This is the joy of doing things live. So please let me know, Pablo, can you see it?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah.
So. Perfect. So what we're going to talk about in today's webinar, so we have 30 minutes and we're going to get through quite a lot of information. I want to give everyone here a quick overview of what is the innovation journey and some key points along the way for the people who are trying to really look at the research results and turn them into a product. So the first thing we're going to look at is just a brief concept of the innovation journey. Then we're going to have a look at who are customers and why should I care. It's an important part. Then we look at converting interview to concepts, so related to the customer interview process. And then a couple of topics that are important for the strategy in the future is looking at the entrepreneurial mindset and different strategy for financing. As I said, I'm going to go through briefly everything. And if you want to go into more detail, please don't forget to ask questions through the feature in the YouTube channel. So first thing is, what is the innovation journey? So traditionally, or most people seem to think it is, I'm brilliant, I have an idea, I build a product, I go out into the world, everyone buys it, and it makes me rich. So that's the first concept. And the first thing is that's not how it works, and also is extremely high risk. The real thing that we're looking at when we're looking at the innovation journey is a series of cyclical processes. So we start with idea generation, where we have a learning cycle going through. So we have an idea generation, then we explore that idea, we do some prioritization, some selection, and from that we develop a prototype. We develop from the prototype product, we then set our boundaries of whether to go or not go, and finally we enter into the market. So at each of these circles, each of these cycles even, there's an inherent risk involved at each stage. So we'll go through different methods for reducing that risk and making sure that you, from the very beginning, can begin to explore ideas and develop your commercialization strategy. In terms of comparing it to a PhD, I think we all know, all of us who've gone through the journey, the PhD cycle could do with some innovating in itself. But to start with, the PhD writing cycle, you have a long period of doing your background writing, your proposal, and your initial meetings. Then you do your literature review. Then you provide your research, collect your data, and finally write your thesis, and if you're lucky, survive your defense. So when we're talking about a low-risk version, so here we have an example of the Lean Startup methodology. So the Lean Startup methodology works quite well because we look at how you reduce the risk by going through the cycles of innovation much quicker to reach the product. So the point of this is to test your hypotheses against the market so that once you reach the market, you're sure it's what they need. In terms of the Lean Startup cycle, we're talking about condensing everything down into smaller bites. So you do some customer development, so you need to understand whether or not there's need or understand the problem. Then you have what we call a minimal viable product. I'm sure some of you have already heard about this, so we're not going to go into it today. But that is basically the minimum set of features that you need to include in the product to make your customers, to solve your customer's problem. Then you build it, then you test it, and then you finally go into the next cycle after you've gone onto your test. Just a small side note here, for those of you who are looking at the Lean Startup, don't forget that it's a software-based methodology. So the idea of launching an MVP immediately in this cycle, we will adapt it later for hardware and for more complex examples. So here is the overall journey. First of all, you have an idea. Then you need to identify really who is your customer. So when we're talking about this, we're identifying who is your market and what is it the customer needs. And it's at that point we decide how we can convert what you have in terms of technology into a product. You develop your product, you develop your product market fit, and then you learn from each cycle, and finally you launch either a company or you commercialize it in a different way. So there's various strategies available to you to commercialize, depending on what country you're in and what your university rules are. If you're talking about a spin-off, you will have to do it in two different ways. So one of the ways is to actually launch a startup. So a startup is a newly emerged business venture that aims to meet a marketplace need. Startups at the moment is a very hot topic. Everyone is excited to set up startups. But what we want to get across, what I would like to get across to you today is that a startup and an SME are not the same things. So a startup, you should really be focusing on being agile and gaining speed, whereas an SME, you might be happy at going at a slower pace. So you need to really adjust about what you're thinking, and that will affect your strategy. The second thing is a spin-off. So as much of you are coming from universities, and you will have developed throughout either your doctorate or your postdoc research, you will have developed some sort of IP. So this is where the difference comes in between a startup and a startup and a spin-off. A spin-off often comes from the IP within a university. So that is the key difference that we find within a startup and a spin-off. When you're dealing with IP, you will already have a technology and you're searching for a market. With a startup, you tend to start with a market and you search for a product. So we're going to work today with the concept of, yes, you have the technology, but you still don't have your market. So we're going to treat the startup, the spin-off, like a startup. So just a final reminder, all spin-offs are startups, but not all startups are spin-offs. So that just finishes off an introduction to talking about the different ways to approach the concept of getting to a product. And let's talk about customers, because this is an important point. And who are customers and why should you care? Well, looking at the analysis of why top startups fail, the reason why they fail is because there's no market need. And the reason why they run out of cash is because they built something that was a waste of time. So what is really important is, before you start to define what your product is and how you're going to commercialize it, you need to be sure it is what there is a market need for it, there is demand, and that you're building something that is appropriate for that. So bringing into that, we're going to discuss a concept called customer discovery. Customer discovery is about answering these 4 questions. Should I build it? Who are my customers? What is my market? And does the problem exist? So in terms of these 4 questions, they're quite important to establish early on. Really, it starts with, does the problem exist? Who are my customers? What is my market? And the final question that you answer is, should I build it? So customer discovery is introduced by Steve Blank. Steve Blank is quite famous for being a lecturer based out of Stanford, and he's responsible for producing such MBA students who've gone on to produce Lean Startup, which is a variation in customer development, as well as many other tech-driven companies. Customer discovery, has a similar cycles to Lean Startup. It actually consists of 4 cycles, but I'm only presenting the 2 here that are most important. So the first 2 are customer discovery, and the second is customer validation. With customer discovery, the idea is that you are cycling through a series of hypotheses where you are trying to find the problem solution fit. For you to understand that, we're talking about an MVP or a product that solves the problem the customer faces. When we go into customer validation, this is more about checking that people want what you've produced. So customer validation is more tricky than customer discovery because it depends much more on the market. Customer discovery is about you going out, finding out what the customers need, finding out what kind of customers you have, and developing your product. Customer validation is finding out whether or not they will pay for it. And that's quite a big acid test. So really what you want to do is make sure that your customer discovery cycle is more efficient, that once you move to customer validation, the part of developing sales channels and reaching the market will be much simpler. But today I'm just going to quickly focus on the customer discovery because I think it's the most valid point to start. And the methodology itself is quite applicable across various different scales. So as in customer discovery can happen within a large corporate, it can happen within your own research. You can apply this methodology in various different scenarios, various different circumstances. So the first thing I want to talk about is the whole point of customer discovery is challenge your assumptions. As a researcher, you will have dedicated a good part of your time to quite a narrow part of research. And as you've gone on in research, that will continue to become narrower and narrower. And of course, you will have multidisciplinary groups, and you will also have collaborations and exchanges. You will then tend to have a very set of ideas. And the problem that we often see with researchers who are trying to commercialize a product or really think about what they can do is they think that what they've developed and their technology is fantastic. And that is true because you have invested a huge amount of your time into it. But the problem is you also don't know the market. And it's really important that at this stage in customer discovery, you challenge your assumptions. So you will have a various set of assumptions that you need about how appropriate your technology is and how the price point, about what the product eventually should be. So here's the cycle of customer discovery. What you need to do is, first of all, state your hypothesis. So this means come up with the idea. I have an idea. I have a concept. Most people who have done a scientific background tend to enjoy this process because it follows very similar concept. So first thing is you state your hypothesis. Then you test that. So by testing it, when we talk about testing at this point, we're referring to speaking to customers. It's about getting them out of the building, doing interviews, and finding out whether or not that problem really exists. As a result of that, you will develop what we consider the minimum features. From that, then you will be able to develop your concept. So what is the product? And start looking at an initial minimal viable product. You can bring that back to the customers and you can verify whether or not it is fitting what they said or what they need. Again, this is a cycle. So although I've presented it linearly here, you should be aiming to go through at least 2 or 3 cycles. In terms of customer discovery, it tends to take 2 to 3 cycles, and probably depending if you're a B2C or a B2B market. Your B2B in customer discovery, you're looking at doing about 30 interviews. And in your B2C, you're looking at completing around 150 interviews or surveys. So there's a different approach depending on your market. And really the real main aim of doing it is you know what you know what you don't know, but in our experience of working with many startups and many researchers, once they go into the customer discovery point of view, you really find out what you don't know. And that is where many opportunities can arise. So it's very important to be open-minded at this point. In terms of talking about your different types of markets, I mentioned B2B and B2C. So that's business to business or business to consumer. Their way of that will affect your whole company, but however, also affecting your strategy in terms of commercialization. You do need to identify from customer discovery what is your ideal market. So, in terms of an existing market, that is a market that already exists. That in terms of there's already a product on the market, there's already a few companies offering that product, if not many, and if you want to compete with these companies, you have to make sure that you are better and you are faster. So an example of this would be TransferWise taking on the banks. So the existing market was for cross-border money transfers. TransferWise came along and took the market out from under them because they offered it for cheaper and they offered it faster than the banks do. The same with Google Chrome taking out Safari and Internet Explorer. Although it's not a startup, you can still see how an existing market has come into it. However, when you are entering into an existing market, you have to realize it's going to cost a lot of money to take down to try and get into the big companies. They will come for you, and you need to make sure that you have enough resources behind you. What is most common in terms of new market entry is the resegmented market. In this, you already have an existing customer base, but you're able to aim for a specific niche, or you're able to provide a lower end of the market. So the example here I have is Ryanair. Ryanair, obviously everyone has flown Ryanair. It's cheaper than the current companies. And the other example here is Izettos. This is quite niche because it's not cheaper, but it is very specific for people who want to take card payments without having to pay for a card payment terminal. So people who, for example, in fairs and markets, that is a niche that Izettos is able to go for. And I think, if I remember correctly, they've just been bought by PayPal. So that was an example. And the other one is Fairphone. So Fairphone is a mobile phone that you're able to easily replace components as they fail. So you're aiming for a ethical consumer there. So again, another niche. In terms of new market, this is quite a rare example. So most people would think that they have come up with a brand new product in a brand new market, and it's never existed before. And the reality is, what often that means is that you have had a resegmented market or a niche, not a new market. It is extremely rare for where a new market comes along. You have no customers, so you have the problem of dealing with non-consumption, and the big risk is market adoption. And to get anyone to adopt anything in terms of market adoption is going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of time, because you need to change how people work and how people think. And the final thing is a clone market. This is dying off a bit, but in terms of market strategy, you have the option of taking what works in a different country, for example, adapting the product slightly, and launching it again. So it's not as expensive, it's slightly copycat, and you have the big risk that the original will come back and be stronger within your own market. So I'm going to go very, very quickly because we have some more topics to get through today. First of all, when you're talking about who are your customers, so who do you talk to? This is the first step. The main point here is don't talk to your family or friends. The problem is they like you too much. They're not going to tell you the truth, and they're going to not try to hurt your feelings. You're not going to actually be able to prove anything. The data you get from them will not be reliable. So when we go to figure out how we're going to find out these customers, the first thing is to describe the potential customer groups. This is kind of, again, you come up with an idea of who you think customer groups are. Then start to look at different networks that are available to you to find these people. So is it in person? Are they online? So where do I find these type of people? I would recommend that everyone prepares a long list of key people. I'm talking about names, I'm talking about positions, or I'm talking about and emails, so that you can go through your customer discovery process in a very methodical way. And the last thing is, email is useless at getting people to respond to you. You're going to have to be brave, and you're going to have to call people and ask them to meet with you for an interview or meet with you for a coffee. And also you're going to have to, or you can go to events where they're going to be. The one thing just on that point is obviously warm leads where you have an introduction will always be more responsive. So when you're doing customer discovery and you're looking for interviews, try to reach out to people you already know and their network as well, see if they can do an introduction for you. The other thing is cold calling. It does work, unfortunately, but it's very, very painful. So I recommend that you do it, because you will get, out of 100 cold calls, you'll get 10 people to respond, but that's enough. And you just have to go through it. You have to go through it like very methodically and very, very quickly. Here are examples of different networks. One thing to mention is do not go for the CEO. Do not go for people high within companies if you're doing a B2B, if you're thinking of a B2B product. They're too busy, and they're also too distant from the problem. So just a small note there is you should probably aim for more middle ground, so people who are head of distribution, head of manufacturing, etc. In terms of B2C and B2B, you have different types of markets. So within B2C, you can start to already reach out to people through things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can start to trial things. You can start to see things very differently. In terms of B2B, you really have to go and find people. So you have university networks is a great protocol, professional networks, LinkedIn. And the other option is to go to meetups. So meetups are very handy because they already have classified the people by their customer type, so you're able to make sure that you're in the same place as they are. So it's a quick way to make sure that you find the right people and bump into them, let's say. When you're doing the interview, it has a structure. So the first thing is to do an introduction. Then there is you have to talk about the person. So find out the context. What is their role? What do they think? How do they do things? Then we need to find out whether the problem exists. So you need to ask some good questions about the problem. Be very analytical in your questions, and don't forget to probe, which we'll talk about in a second. So you have to then address the problem, and then also the processes that surround a problem, because often you can solve a problem but without taking into account the constraints within that problem operates, you find yourself either creating a product that isn't fit for purpose because it doesn't fit in with the rest of the workflow, or it is too expensive, or it requires, I don't know, example, an IoT example, it requires too much battery, or requires, for example, or requires wired, it requires the solution to be wired into the mains rather than being able to run by battery. So there's constraints that you need to take into account there, and also look at how they decide on a product. So that is also by setting criteria for you to work with inside. And the final thing is an outro. So never forget to leave without asking for something a bit more, which usually in this case, if for your first interview, will just be a follow-up. So just in terms of questions, there's open, close, and leading. Within open, you should really be looking to use open questions during customer discovery. You don't want to control the conversation. This person's given up their time to you. It's up to you to listen, but you do want to make sure you touch all the bases. So open questions begin with, describe how you would describe how you arrived to work today. Why did you choose that? How do you normally travel to work? Examples like that are open questions, which means that you give control and there's no yes or no answers. If there's a yes or no answer, it's a closed question. Closed questions are quite useful for when you want to really finish off an interview, and you want to make sure that you have the points, you want to have your understanding correct, confirmed. But in terms of the initial couple of customer interviews that you do, these will be very difficult because what you will be doing is imposing your view of the problem onto the participant. And also they will feel like it's interrogation. And the last thing is leading questions. This is where you give the answer to the person within the question. So, for example, webinars are very difficult. No, because you can't see the people. Don't you agree? So you've already given the negative in the question, so people will always then respond going, I guess so, or I suppose. Remember, bad data in, bad data out. Okay. And then the other thing is just to remember, customers themselves are lying because they do want to tell you what you'd like to hear. People want to please generally. During the interviews, you need to make sure that you kind of look beyond what they're saying and really get to what they mean. And just in terms of finishing up, so again, I've gone very briefly through this. We deal with this in much more detail in a 4-hour workshop, but I'll just go very quickly through this. When you're finishing off, what you need to make sure is, when can you decide to move on to designing your concept or designing your product? Take these few points in mind. So if the problem that you're trying to discover isn't in the top 3 of the people you're speaking to, you're talking to the wrong people. Okay, so you've got 2 things there. Either your problem doesn't exist, or isn't that important, or you're talking to the wrong people. If you keep hearing the same thing again and again, it basically means if you're bored, you're done for now because you've kind of reached a level at which you can keep on going. The point here where we say if you keep hearing a need that's currently not being satisfied, that's referring to if you go in with a different concept in mind and a different idea, and you keep hearing about a different problem, start looking at that problem because that might be where your opportunity is. So we have 10 minutes left before we go to questions. I'm just going to go very quickly through a couple of methodologies for getting beyond what the person is saying and discussing what it is that they need. And then we're going to have a quick look at a methodology for, I'm going to quickly introduce a methodology for entrepreneurial mindset. So as in everyone can be an entrepreneur. And then we'll finish off with just a quick overview of different type of funding, when should you apply for it, and grants. So I'm going to go quickly through here. So basically, when we're talking about a need, needs is a very subjective question. So what is really important is that you develop an objective concept of what a person is really trying to achieve when they use a solution. So we have a concept here called the jobs to be done framework. Jobs to be done was first published by, well, it was between someone called Christopher Claytonson and Anthony Ulwick. Both of them kind of developed the concept independently and fed off each other. But it's become a very common way of identifying what a customer is really saying. So what a potential customer is really saying to you. And really what it is that looking at not what they're saying, because people will tell you what they want to hear. For example, if the misappropriated quote to Henry Ford is, if I asked my customers for what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. So I think this is the whole concept here, is that Anthony Levitt also mentioned it in the 1960s. People do not want to drill; they want a quarter-inch hole. So the concept is to get beyond what it is that the tool that they're going to use to achieve their job, but actually is what they want to get done. So in terms of the process, is you have to first of all define the context within which the user, the customer, is trying to get that job done. You need to identify the job to be done. This concept is quite easy if you follow the 5 whys, so the Toyota method. So when someone gives you a reason, you ask why, and usually by the time you get to the 5th why, you've reached the essence of what they're trying to achieve. Then you need to prioritize, select which is the most important, segment the market based on that, and then start your ideation. In terms of the jobs to be done, and again, this is a deeper methodology. Christian Claytonson and Anthony Ulwick both have very good books on it, which I will include in the notes if you wish to see the notes. But the main concept is that you have 3 types of jobs. You have the focal job, the one that the customer is trying to achieve. And this is really what we consider a functional job. So it's kind of the basic, or the function they're trying to achieve. This is the core job they're trying to do. At the same time, a customer might be trying to achieve other jobs. That's the related jobs at the same time. And then finally, there's emotional jobs. So personal and emotional jobs are personal and social jobs. So it's how the person wants to feel and how the person wants to be perceived. I'm not going to go into much detail. It's quite complex, but I just want to introduce to you so you can have an idea about it and start looking at maybe doing some looking up into it. In terms of trying to identify your job, we tend to provide a structure to it. So here's an example for an Industry 4.0 solution. This is the person who is interviewing a production manager. And the main job that person is trying to achieve is, the focal job is maintain optimal production conditions without intervention. So the solution I'm referring to here is a solution that automatically manages, based on various sensor data, the variables within a production process. So that could be temperature, that could be inputs, that could be time of reaction, for example. There's various different things there that this solution is intended for, an Industry 4.0 solution. But the real job that the production manager is trying to achieve is maintaining the optimal production conditions without intervention. So that is what has been said. But really what we're looking at is maintain optimal conditions during production. I won't go any further in terms of looking at innovation, bring it back to innovation. In terms of jobs and customers, you can start to look at different innovation strategies. And finally, just when you're dealing with customers and dealing with your concept, the main thing to think about when someone is, to see if someone's interested, is whether or not they have, whether or not they give you time, money, or reputation. So are they willing to introduce someone else? That's reputation. Are they willing to meet again? They're willing to give you time. Did you convert an assumption to validation? That's something for you to understand. And have you done something new? But just remember, people will tell you that they like what you're selling or they like what you're developing. But if they don't give you time, money, or reputation, they haven't given you anything. There's no commitment there at all. And the final thing there, just in terms of customer validation, it's actually quite simple. Customer validation is about achieving product market fit. So once you've gone through customer discovery, as we kind of went through quite quickly, you develop your concept, you develop your MVP, you check it out, and you've designed a product that really will meet the customer's needs. Now it's a question of testing whether it meets the market needs. And you know about customer validation once you've achieved it, once you have more revenue than costs. And I'm not referring to your bank sheets, I'm referring to your revenue. So once your revenue, your recurring revenue is higher than your costs, and this is in the case of a company, then you've achieved product market fit. And now is the time to start looking for money. And just a final comment on customer validation or product market fit, you always know. So a lot of people who maybe you've already tried to start setting up a company, or you've tried to go out there and sell, you just kind of know that people aren't buying what you're selling, and that means either the product's wrong or how you're selling is wrong. So product market fit hasn't been achieved yet. So I have 5 minutes left, and I'm just going to go quickly into the entrepreneurial mindset. I want to just introduce a concept called effectuation. So we have a different thing, it's a different way of thinking. And really my whole point here is that anyone can be an entrepreneur, anyone can be a successful entrepreneur. It's about changing how you think and about managing risk. So we have two ways of thinking at the moment, really. One is causation. So I've got a problem, there's a solution, that's my answer. Really what they're saying is I have a goal and I'm going to figure out the way to get there. Whereas effectuation starts with what you have, who you are, and what's already available to you, to then see what potential goals you can have. So I know it might not be a bit clear, but I'll try to be quick as possible. So the concept here in terms of the effectuation methodology, it comes from a researcher called Sarah Sarasvathy. She developed the model. The first principle is bird in the hand. So again, you start with who you know, what skills you have, what you already have available to you, what means essentially available to you. Then you focus on affordable loss. So instead of focusing on the opportunity that is available, so if I have this brilliant idea and if I go for it, I could earn €2 million within the next year. That's a great opportunity. Focus more on what you're willing to lose. So how much are you willing to risk? Is it, €20,000? Is it €5,000? Is it €5? You need to assess what it is you're willing to lose. The next thing is lemonade, is looking at it's and I apologize, it's quite Americana, dealing with problems on the way and seeing them as opportunities. And then the fourth thing is the crazy patchwork quilt. So this is really important. It's about forming partnerships and building networks. And if anyone wants to really go out and launch something, you have to use networks and you have to partner up. And the final thing is the pilot and the plane. So this is the concept of co-creating the future. So is in where the pilot sits within the cabin, is what that means, where you give over control and you work with what is it within your control to achieve more success. So here's how it all fits in together. So first of all, you start with your means. You then look at your affordable loss. From there, you set goals. You start to develop your network out, create commitments, and either you get new goals out of that or you get new means out of that. So once you develop new partnerships, you have opportunities. And the final thing is you develop new products. Okay, so last thing then to just go into was funding. Okay, so we're about to just quickly talk about funding. Where does it come in and where does it happen? So at your early stage, where you really are still talking about an idea or a concept, it starts off at the pre-seed, we call it. And here you're talking about, friends, family, or neighbors, or commonly referred to as friends, families, and fools. And this is where people who want to help you out. They don't really care that much about what it is that you're developing or your idea or your product, but it's about helping you out. Then moving up the scale into seed, you start talking about co-investment funds and you start talking about business angels. So business angels are people who invest their own money in you and they expect quite a low return in terms of it's quite a high risk activity for them. And when you're talking to business angels, it's really while you're developing your MVP, and it's about helping you make sure that you achieve the product market fit. So that is where this sits into it. So product market fit sits between business angels and early growth. This is what you're trying to achieve. Then you have crowdfunding, which is another alternative route to you. And you also have seed funds. So seed funds and business angels. The difference between business angel is lower money, but they will invest themselves more in your company. So really, when you're looking at applying for funding from a business angel, you're trying to get their networks and their experience. And the other thing to look at is grants. We'll talk about it in a moment. Basically, what happens is you reach a point at which this money starts to dry up because you start needing more money as your project becomes more and more developed. So the risk becomes lower, but you will have achieved product market fit by this point. And this should really be about exploring that customer validation part and making sure that you have a sustainable product and gaining ground before finally moving on to the much bigger areas. So in terms of IPOs, venture capital, bank financing, etc. Banks won't give you money without anything behind it. They're very much low risk. But the one thing I want to get across to you all today before I start answering the questions is the most important thing about money is you need to get it from clients. You should always talk about your clients. You should always focus on getting money from clients first and money from other people second. And also the different type of company that you have will change how you need money. Just the last thing is to talk about funding, because often in academia we tend to always think of public money first. The one thing is to make sure that you need the money, but also to make sure that you're ready for it. No one's going to give you money unless you're ready for it. And in terms of grants, in Europe, you have quite a lot of options available, mainly for technology R&D, for commercialization of the product. But you need to make sure that the public grant money is the right one for you. So the first thing is, the good thing about grants is that you get cash. It's great. You don't need to repay money. And you also don't give out equity. So unlike equity, you don't have to sell your shares in return for receiving public money, because you will be generating, in the eyes of the provider, jobs and future opportunities. The other thing is you can use public grants because it shows confidence in your product and shows that you might already have an initial market to start to attract investors, and also support the collaborations with others, so developing out your networks further. And just don't forget, though, that grants may not suit your business. They require a huge amount of time and investment on your side. They're available for early stage products, but they have strict rules, and they also have issues with the cash flow. And some of them do require match funding of between 50 and 70%. So within grants, what I'd like to say is you can within grants you can get money, you can receive a lot of money, and you can be quite successful at receiving grants. But if it's not the right fit for your business, you could be turning your business away from the real opportunity, which is gaining sustainable revenue. So make sure that the grants are fit for purpose and that you're not getting money for money's sake, and you're not chasing the money for adapting your business to chase the money. So it's always easier to raise money when you don't need it. It sounds contradictory. It always takes longer, and you always underestimate how much you need. So I think that's really, I've gone as quickly as I can through everything. I have lots of questions to answer. So the first one I'm going to answer is from Narman. So what if a customer needs something that your product can't provide? So really what we're talking about there is that you've developed something already and the customers aren't buying. So you have a problem with your product market fit. What you need to do is go back in the process, look at your customer discovery, speak to the customers again, and begin to define what it is that the product needs. There's two things there. You could either be talking to the wrong customer. So when you go back to your customer discovery cycle again, you'll talk to a different customer group and see if the problem that your product that you already have is fixing, solves them. or if not, you're going to have to relook at your product. That would be my advice. But the first thing is always to talk to customers and get some insights that way. I hope that helps. Marco, what about sending a survey around instead of making interviews? It would allow you to get more statistics. In customer discovery, you won't get anything from a survey, because what you will often find once you do the interview, it's more that what's not spoken about, or the kind of tangents that the conversation goes in, is where the value comes from. So I would always recommend that you don't send a survey, because you are already defining what the answers will be. So when you're doing customer discovery, it's about exploring really what it is that the customer, who the customer is, what their problems are, and understanding more, a bigger range or a bigger spectrum of issues there. In terms of surveys, however, they are useful once you have gone through a couple of cycles and you want to really confirm a market size, or if you want to start looking at how you segment your market. So in a B2C scenario, surveys tend to help, but I'd always recommend you start with interviews. And if you're looking then to quantify the market or segment your market, then you can start to use surveys, but always do interviews first. And if you're doing an interview, you should always do it in person, or at least by Skype, because a lot of the times body language tells you a lot more than the words coming out of their mouth. Pavlo, so the question you have is, can one person with a brilliant idea create a new market, or does it always need to be backed up by lots of money? That's a hard question to ask. In terms of creating a new market, it's really about having something that is groundbreaking, that is a new way of doing things that has never been done before. So previously I had included examples such as Dropbox. In terms of Dropbox, okay, there was a small amount of people within the university crowd who were using cloud storage, but a lot of people weren't used to the concept of not having the files on your computer and changing how they worked. And it actually took Dropbox a huge amount of long time to really reach a sustainable number of users to really launch into the market. So I would suggest, in terms of, can one person with a brilliant idea create a new market? It depends on what the brilliant idea is, how cheap it is to implement. But there is always going to be a longer period because you're convincing people to change how they've always done something, and market adoption, which is a big challenge that often does require a lot of investment. But again, it depends on the product or in terms of the market as well. So if it's something that's quite cheap or quite easy, like an app, I don't know how groundbreaking an app can be, but in that case, you're just asking someone to download and maybe change slightly how they do things. But it's rare that that's actually creating a new market. Diego, so you presented many methodologies and methods. Which one do I apply first? That's a really good question. So the first thing is just really the core methodology that you should start with is customer discovery, as always. It's about looking at who your customer is, should you build it, does the problem exist, who your customer is, and should you build it? The other methodology that I presented very, very briefly, and I apologize for going quickly through it, is the methodology relating to effectuation and the entrepreneurial mindset. This is more for how you approach strategies and how you approach generally the opportunity to create something new. So it's about really, they're quite complementary, because customer discovery is about really understanding what your customer is and what they need. And then effectuation is about looking about what you have, what you have to hand, who do you know, what's available to you, and then figuring out what kind of risk you're willing to lose. So calculated loss before making a selection. In terms of the jobs to be done, that is something that you apply to the outputs of customer discovery, of your customer discovery interviews, just to put that in context. Okay. Narman, what if in the middle of your production you lose the customer? So I assume what you're referring to here is that you have a small market. So you have a small market with a low volume, but a high value market. So you've got one customer in the middle of your production. I have to say that that's actually quite a difficult scenario, and I know a lot of startup companies who go into piloting or go into go into piloting, or they go into a contract with the customer, and eventually, usually a large corporate. And the large corporate, for whatever happens within the internal workings of the corporate, decide to not continue with the pilot, continue with the product, and you're kind of left holding there. I think in that case, what you should be looking at is looking for another customer. But you should also go back and really kind of assess why that product that's in production was not suitable. So I think really, because you've already made a huge investment there, you will have to at least continue with your production, but you need to start looking at asking the questions and going back and talking to people. And I know it's difficult, because sometimes it's very difficult to get people to respond to you once they've already kind of said no to something. But it's about exploring why and what were the constraints, and maybe you missed something out in terms of the constraints and the selection criteria. And also, as can happen, you just don't fit with what's going on in their business at that point. So maybe not something you're doing, it's just a question you need to go find more customers. I think that's a big risk of dealing with a single large customer. You should always try to diversify, even if the attraction is always to I've got a big customer, I don't know, say Coca-Cola, and you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So it's a question really there for looking at the effectuation, the affordable loss. And again, Armin, you're asking about, if you want to expand your business, should you look for new customers or stick with the customers you know? There's that. I'm not sure I can answer that question for you, because we're talking there more about business strategy. So you are assuming that you already have a recurring revenue line, a product that is already has customers for it. You have various options there when you're looking at that. You can either start to expand into different markets with the same product, or expand into the same markets with different product lines. So if you're doing the first one, which is expanding into new markets with the same product, then you're going to be looking at market studies, go-to-market strategies, etc. That's much more adapting what you have to what the regional or the different customer groups are. If you're looking at expanding your product lines to like a whole new customer group rather than new market, then you really have to start looking again at customer discovery. It's a cycle, you can keep going back to it and doing interviews, and of course, you're at a different place starting from, because you already have a product and it's more about adoptions. But I'd always recommend you go back and talk to these new customers that you might want to. But in terms of which way to take your business, I can't tell you the answer. It's something you have to know about how your business is and really what kind of risk you're willing to take, because there's risks and consequences involved in each way. Pavlo, what's the best way to partner up and expand your network? Do you know what the main thing I'm going to say here is that a lot of people miss out on opportunities because they tend to focus or are afraid of giving away their idea. Okay, and I think the main thing to say here is that the most successful entrepreneur or innovator is the one that is the best executor. So as in, a lot of people will have very similar ideas. When you're talking about IP, that's a different scenario. When you're talking about patentable products, you shouldn't give it away. So that's a different question. You maybe need to talk to your tech transfer officers in the university, because they wouldn't want to go talking about your patent everywhere, or your potential patentable product. But it is important to talk about what your idea is. Don't be afraid to talk about your idea. To partner up and expand your network it's a combination of going to events. It's a combination of meeting people. It's about building up trust. It's really about going out there, meeting different types of people, and seeing opportunities, so spotting opportunities that you could potentially try out together. When we're talking about grants, actually, public grants tend to be actually a really good opportunity for that, because you're able to put together a consortium at low risk. So I think really the thing is, get out there. Don't be afraid to talk about your idea. Okay, there's a risk someone will steal it, but the chances are, they're not that many people are interested in your idea. And in terms of partnering up, it's about building up trust. Trust is really important. And especially for SMEs, and most of us in Europe are SMEs, it's about building up complementary networks of people. And the only way you can do that is by meeting these people and finding opportunities to work together and building up with small levels of interaction to much larger risk. Again, risk is the categories. Maria, what can be a product in humanities? In humanities, you have books and not something like concrete like physics. Yes, but you can offer services. So here you're talking about services in humanities. So I think you need to be looking at what kind of services you can put into place and what kind of technology falls beneath it. Lamia, is adapting business based on customer needs a good idea? Similar question for getting grants. So when you're going for grants, you often are trying to make what you have fit what the call is, and trying to get the money, trying to really adapt what you really want to do to get the money. Often, with grants, what I'd always say is you have to make sure it really is within the strategy of your company and or strategy of your group, maybe more specifically, and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So it's really important to make the decision of whether or not a grant is right for you, because you will spend, you will receive money and you'll generate revenue, but it might not be sustainable because you're still not going in the right direction. But in terms of basing it on customer needs, a good or a bad idea. So as I said to you, customers are your market. So you need to make sure that what you're building has a market. And when I'm talking about what you're building has a market, the first thing is, does it solve the problem? Because if you're not building something that doesn't solve the problem, then you're wasting your time, and you're spending a lot of money on something that will not work. You can sustain it by grants, but it might not actually work in the end. So I'd always suggest, customer needs be your one of your many inputs. The second thing about customer needs is really it's about understanding more broadly. So I'm not talking about what customers want and the whimsical nature of what customers want and them telling you exactly what they want. I'm talking about what they need and what they're trying to achieve, and understanding the context, because within the context you can find opportunities. So if you can do it with, that might be a quicker step or a shorter step or a cheaper way of doing things, people are more likely to come on board. Or if you're able to offer a product that fits within the difficulties. So an example that I have from is something called Plumpy Nut. So it is a solution that was developed for starving children in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's made up of, it's a high nutrition food. But the main thing was, up until then, they'd been sending out basically milk powder, similar to baby formula. But to do that, you need to have bulk storage, you need to have a local source of clean water, you need to have, if you want to send out other things, you need to have refrigeration. So taking those into account, with Plumpy Nut, it takes up low volume, it lasts forever, and doesn't require any other external water, for example, or cooking or heating. So that was an example where, although the product's based on the needs, it's not exactly what they're saying. I want food. It's actually solving the constraints and the surroundings within the area. So I hope that was a long-winded answer, but in summary, grants, you need to be really careful, because you don't want to end up as a zombie company being kept alive by grants but not really having a company or having a product. In terms of adapting your business based on your customers' needs, we're not talking about adapting your business, we're talking about adapting your product and making sure that your product meets what the customer really wants, or what the customer is really trying to achieve, and increasing your opportunities for success. So it's about reducing the risk that you will have market failure. So within large corporates, the market failure is 80% of innovation products. So by applying these methodologies, you should be able to flip the proportion of that. I'm not saying change your business, but I am talking about adapting your product. And the last thing is, it comes from Norman. So you meant more in case you have a product and you figure out the new way your product can be useful, should you waste time and resources looking for new customers? I think the main thing that you're asking there is that you already have a product that's working and you have customers. Should you waste time and resources looking for the new customers? I think you need to focus. You need focus. So if you're talking about early stage company, you need focus. I'm not suggesting, and please don't take it away, that you go out and explore every single opportunity. You need to focus, because the quickest to execute is the likely to be most successful. So, but if it's not working, then you need to start looking at different customers. That's what I'm trying to say. So focus, give it a good go. Would be my suggestion, and if it's not working, then but again, that's a suggestion, and it's up to the individual situation which you're in. I can't comment on your situation in that way anymore. So I think that's it for now. I hope it's been informative, and I hope I didn't speak too fast. It's one of my personal problems. So please do feel free to get in contact, and I'm sure the slides will be shared out with you as well.
Thank you, Brandon, a lot for your talk. And it was very nice. And thank you, guys, for sending the questions. They were quite engaging. And thank you, Brandon, for also giving us your insight on all the interesting questions and issues. Just a reminder that the next webinar will take place on the 21st of December. It's a free one. It will be given by Patricia Marti-Puig, where she'll talk about her transition from academia into business as well. So thank you so much again, Brandon, and all of you guys who joined us, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.